Well, hello, everyone. This is David Henriksen with Getting Company, and today I'm joined by Ryan Romeo, author of Head in the Clouds, Feet on the Ground. This is a survival guide for creatives, visionaries, and dreamers. Ryan is the creative director and co-founder of the Outcry Worship Tour and author of the book Outcry. He's currently the pastor of creative arts at Living Streams Church in Phoenix, Arizona, where he lives with his wife, Blake, and their 3 children. This is going to be a really fun discussion. Ryan, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on, David. It's an honor.
Yeah, so first of all, I just have to ask, how are you and the family doing during the COVID-19 lockdown?
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot like a lot of other people are doing. We're figuring out homeschool with our kids. We've set up completely changed our living room. So now we have like a little school area and everything else. And we're learning how to do a lot of Zoom calls and do a lot of
Exactly.
work remotely. Um, but at the same time, I think we're really finding kind of a hidden blessing in slowing life
Mm,
down a little bit and spending more time with each other. And
yeah,
so I will say, that has been for me the awesome sort of like hidden blessing in the season is just spending lots of time with the family,
yeah,
and we're talking about Bible, we're talking about issues, in discipleship way more than we ever have. Like our
yeah.
nightly conversations are way deeper.
Uh,
So we're just, yeah, we're doing great. We're staying healthy, all of that, you know.
that's awesome. You look like you got a pretty sophisticated setup there in that microphone. So do a fair amount of video conferencing from home.
Yes, we're doing a lot of
So how's the
video
church
conferencing.
doing? Yeah.
We're
How's the
doing we're
how's the
doing
church
fine.
doing?
The church is doing fine. We're figuring it out. We're
Yeah,
doing what everybody else is doing, kind of figuring out how to do live streaming, and we've been doing it already for years,
gotcha.
but now we're really pouring in a lot of effort into it. And so even Easter, we just pre-recorded Easter yesterday, and everyone's kind of looking around going, this is so weird, but but we're doing the best that we can with it, and we're
Yeah,
just thankful that we have the technology to keep pastoring people and connecting with people. It really is
exactly. Yeah,
God's grace, I think, to allow something like this to happen in a season where the church could stay connected.
yeah. Well, you're in Phoenix. I'm in Atlanta. And I think we might have sort of a common Kevin Bacon kind of connection in David Crowder. We are
Oh,
huge Crowder fans here in Atlanta with his affiliation with Passion and Six Steps Records. Tell us about Outcry, because before we dive into the book, Outcry was a dream of yours, if you will. So
yeah.
tell us a little bit about the Outcry tour.
Yeah, so when I started working with David Crowder, I was a graphic designer, and I still am a graphic designer. I don't know if you ever stopped being a graphic designer, but so I started doing design for him in Tucson, Arizona, which is not the Bible Belt. And I
Right.
kind of tell the story in the book, but it's just this kind of like, sometimes in life there's these moments where God just speaks and it's so clear and it's so amazing. And then there's other times where it feels so normal and natural. And that was one of those seasons where I just, decided to go into graphic design school and decided, what I probably need somebody that has some notoriety, as I'm a graphic designer. And so I wrote cold emails to a bunch of people, everyone that I ever looked up to, and said, I don't know who's doing your graphic design or your web design, but I would love an opportunity. And Crowder was the only one that responded. And he
Yeah,
said,
that's
if you've
awesome.
got some ideas, we need some web help. Why don't you come up with some ideas and we'll look at them? And when that happened, I oftentimes build like rules in my head, and I said, okay, I have 1 week, they strike while the iron's hot. I want to give Crowder an idea in 1 week. And so I sat down, and I didn't know half as much about web design as I thought I did. And, and just teaching myself till 3 a.m. And we were doing
Right.
Flash web design, which at the time was like everything, animated websites was the thing. And he had an album at the time called Remedy, and so designed a website, Flash website with animation and everything that was like Remedy. And it was just so crazy. I sent him an email a week later, said, here's my idea. He got back to me a day later and said, we love it. And my next email was with Shelly Giglio at 268.
Well, there
And
you go. Yeah,
Crowder is, I mean, what a great place to get into the Christian music scene. And the weirder the design, the more he loved it. And we
for
put all
sure.
sorts of
It
weird
sounds like
hidden
Crowder.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, weird hidden things in the website. And so through that, one day David said, gave me a call and said, want to start this conference called Crowder's Fantastical Church Music Conference, which again is very David Crowder.
Exactly.
Um, and so I did design, did a lot of work for him. And at that conference, I met a guy named Shane Quick, and he was running kind of all the logistics for it. And we were both young and kind of proving ourselves in our different areas. And Shane, about a year later, after we had met at that conference, he called me. And at the time, it was 2009, I think, and the economy was not great. And I realized I needed to stop doing graphic design. And I started doing manufacturing for my dad, which for me was like the lowest, like coming to my dad going, hey, can I have a job? And
Right, right.
I'm up to my eyeballs in Excel spreadsheets going, what am I doing with my life? And one day, finished a meeting, got a call. It said Shane Quick, and I had even forgotten. I'm like, man, it sounds so familiar. He answered the phone, and he said, I'm thinking of doing a worship leader conference called Outcry. What do you think? And that's where it started. And him and I talked for like an hour and a half. And I think he called thinking I was going to help him with graphic design. And after about an hour and a half on the phone, he's going, I think we have a lot more to talk about than just design. He said, I just started working with this new group called Jesus Culture. Why don't you come out to LA and let's keep talking about
Amazing.
it? And that was the beginning of this long process, up until the end of 2014. And between there, like we really had about 4 or 5 years where I would kind of randomly fly out and we'd meet together and we'd talk, what if we did this and what if we did that? And then we'd finish these big dreaming sessions. I'd go home and I'd write them down and go, okay, maybe this is what we're going to do. And we had designed all these posters and everything else. And so fast forward to 2014, I'm at my brother's wedding in California, and Shane calls me and he said, I just got off the phone with Joel Houston from Hillsong United. He said,
Wow.
he said he wants to do a tour in America, but he doesn't want to do a Hillsong tour. He's like, what if we turned Outcry into a tour? And
Mm,
that was really the first time we had ever talked about it being a tour.
wow.
And obviously on the phone, him and I were both like, hey, if Joel Houston says yes, that's like a voice from the Lord saying, you could do Outcry.
Well, and
And
this kind of spoke to you, right? Because you're
yes,
sort of used to being a big thinker and a big dreamer and a visionary. And so the bigger, the better, I would think, in sort of your mind and in your spirit.
absolutely. And that was for me. I mean, I don't think we even appreciated. I was always going, yes, let's go bigger. And
Right.
Shane too. And so the tour comes along and we're like, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And you fast forward about a week, we're getting emails back from Carrie Job saying she's in,
Wow.
Passion saying they're in, David Crowder saying he's in, Bethel saying they're in, Jesus Culture saying they're in. It was basically a list of every one of my heroes going, yes, we'll do this tour. And probably about 4 months later, we took it off the ground and we had 10 to 20,000 people a night.
Mm,
But it's so funny to see, the Lord kind of lead us into that, because after a few outcries, I was going, oh man, I can't imagine this not being a tour. Like, of
right.
course, if the heart behind it is unity and a passion for the local church, how much better is it that these teams get together and they hang out every single day for 3 weeks?
Right. Right.
We really looked back and saw the hand of God, even in those like last minute decisions that we made. Um, but then up until this point, we've done about 90 outcries and had
Wow.
almost 1 million people attend and about 50,000 people give their life to Jesus. And those are the kind of things that to me, I'm going, I know the Lord's not impressed by numbers. Those are just callings that we had. We had a calling to do outcry and we just did it the best that we could. But I still look back on that and go, wow, I don't know if I could fully wrap my head around
Yeah.
the impact of one dream when God releases it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the book, Head in the Clouds, Feet on the Ground. So you write it's a survival guide for creatives, visionaries, and dreamers.
Yes.
And I confessed to you before we got on this video conference that I read this thinking this is not for me. I'm a science major with an MBA, and I run a business here in here in Atlanta, Georgia. Like I don't aspire to sort of the or associate with these terms. But
Yeah.
you say before anybody sort of hits stop on this video recording, you say this is all of us. That was sort of how
Yes.
you start the book. Like everybody fits into this category. Talk about that.
Yes, I think in this season, I get a lot of mixed reviews on social media saying, "Hey, follow God-given dreams," and people are like, "Oh, being a Christian is not about following your dreams." And I said, I'm looking through it a little bit of a different lens. I think it starts with really appreciating the way that God created each one of us, and each one of us are created very differently. There are different foundational things that when it comes to our identity in Jesus, we all have in common. And
Yeah.
that's where it starts, really understanding, gosh, the passions, the giftings, the talents that God gave me, he gave them to me on purpose. And even I talk a little bit about science in the book, just a tiny bit. I grew up in an engineering family,
Thank
so
you.
I
Little
knew, I'm
shout
like,
out to us science people. Yeah.
I am no expert. But just even the idea of our DNA, like it's literally impossible for anybody to be exactly the same as somebody else. Even identical twins, their DNA is different, just slightly, And there's these things that when we take a step back and we can look in awe at the miracle that we are, that God created us, that he made us unique for a reason. He gave us the passions and dreams that we have for a reason.
Yeah.
When we look at ourselves that way, then we start to look at these dreams not as just like this self-serving, I want to just kind of be like what I see on TV sort of dream. And it's more like I want to explore the way that God made me
Yeah.
and understand that this calling that God has me on is a journey. It's not a destination. Even for me, Outcry was beautiful. It was awesome, but it was a chapter in my life, and I have more chapters to come,
Right. Right.
and that's what's so beautiful about that. And so really the heart behind it was to have everybody, not just creative people, not just church people, but
Yeah.
everyone really understand that God has given you passions for a reason. And even for the people that are going, gosh, I don't even know what my dreams are.
Right.
I think when we approach God with this sort of expectation that he is going to speak to us, that we have this relationship with God, and maybe we start asking questions that we haven't asked of him before, going, what are the things that make me come alive? What are the things that you've gifted me uniquely to do? What have you put in my hands right now that I could really make the most out of you? And even in the book, I talk about, I had this general dream when I was 17 years old. I was listening to Delirious. It's mid 90s. Delirious was like everything, even Passion at the time, their albums were remakes of Delirious songs. Um, I remember listening to Delirious Live 97, and I was going, I just felt like the Lord was saying, Ryan, you're going to do something in that realm. And fast forward a couple years ago, we had Martin Smith from Delirious out on Outcry.
Yeah.
And I think I fangirled over that more than anybody else that came on the tour. And I love Martin. I mean, Martin would play a different Delirious song every night. And I remember sitting at a table with like Carrie Job's band one night, and we heard him start to play the song Obsession from, again, mid 90s Delirious. We all ran out with like our camera, like our phones on our, like recording it. But that was something that, again, back in the 90s, God gave me this kind of general idea, mid 90s. And then nearly 20 years later, Outcry comes along. It looks a lot different than I thought it was going to look.
Right.
God
Right.
gave me that little inkling, even in my teenage years, of what I was going to be doing. And I think that that's the journey that we're all on. There's this kind of these passions that we have when we're young, that just like Joseph gets this dream. It's very vague. It's very, it's like, you're going to be a man of great influence, but Joseph doesn't know what he's going to do when he gets there. He doesn't know how he's going to get there. He doesn't know how long it's going to take to get there. And so many of us have that sort of echo in our heart of like this prophetic echo of what God's going to do in our lives. But the journey of really taking that inkling seriously to seeing it fulfilled is beautiful, and it's
Yeah.
amazing, and it's unlike any other thing that you'll ever do in your life.
Yeah. Well, I want to remind people that the title of your book, Ryan, is Head in the Clouds, Feet on the Ground. And
Mhm.
you do a really nice job sort of encouraging people to be aspirational and to be visionary, but also to be very practical. And I want to talk about the practicality in a second. Before that, let's talk about dreamers for a minute, because you sort of say there are these two bookends, there are these two extreme positions, the curmudgeon and then the it's all easy optimist or something like
Yes. Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can, I mean, at the end of the day, we all are aspirational. We all have
Mhm.
some level of creativity. Why is it important to kind of avoid these two extremes?
Well, I think, as I was looking at this, I just started to analyze kind of my own life. And that's what's beautiful about writing a book. You kind of back solve your own life. And I think back on the different times that God had kind of revealed to me when I would be around people and go, sometimes people that I really love and that are still in my life and I really love and appreciate, but they fall into that curmudgeon category. It's like, hey, I used to be a dreamer kid. I
Yeah.
get it. And now I've hit
I got
enough
bills
life
to
to
pay.
know.
I got mouths to
Yeah.
feed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so many times you get this feeling of you're kind of downplaying my dream because you maybe lament the fact that you kind of gave up on something that was in your heart, or you started pursuing it and it didn't look like you thought and you kind of dumped it. And I think we really need to avoid that. We really need to go into our dreams expecting them. They will be hard. It's going to be not like you think it's going to be. I always tell people, especially with church leaders, they're like, "Oh man, I wish I could stand on a stage in front of 10 or 20,000 people." And I always go, I wish you could too, because you would feel how strangely normal it feels. It's not this, it's going to fulfill your life if you stand in front of a big crowd. It's never that. But, but to not get into that place where you're allowing other people to just be like, no, give up on it. Don't even try. That's the curmudgeon side. Then there's the optimist side. And I think that it's like this, it kind of results in the same thing I say in the book. Both bookends result in the same thing, kind of dumping your dreams and giving up on them.
Yeah.
But the optimist approaches it like, man, the Lord is with me. I'm going to just sit back and I'm going to pray all day and God's going to do
Watch it
this amazing
unfold.
thing.
Listen, it's all
Yeah,
gonna
I'm just going to
yeah.
watch it all happen. And I go, no, in the Bible, it says we're co-laborers with Jesus. We're co-workers with God. What an amazing privilege it is. And there's been so many times where I'm praying, God gives me a dream. I write it down. It's always my first step. I write something down and I pray over it. And then God will bring some connection, kind of like that connection with Shane Quick with Outcry. All of a sudden, bam, he brings someone along. I'm going, man, amazing. But then there's a moment where your hand has to go to, like, you have to put your hand to the plow at some point. Like, you
Yeah.
have to
Right.
start working at some point. And God brings these miraculous connections. Great. How you steward them is another question. Um, and I think the optimist is just kind of like a little pie in the sky, a little bit like this is all going to be amazing. And the first time that there's a roadblock or the first time they have to put in a 12-hour day to get it done, they go, oh, I guess I'm striving. And, maybe I need to just stop this because God doesn't want me to do it. And I go, no, just because you hit hard work or you hit a setback or you hit somebody who doesn't understand what you're going after doesn't mean you need to stop. It just means you need to buckle down and hear from the Lord even harder and go, okay, are you saying this? And there's many times where I'm like, God, are you sure? Are you sure
Yeah.
you want me to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
this? And I hear him go, yes. And I go, okay, so I'm going to plow through this issue, or I'm going to plow through, even though I'm having people saying X, Y, or Z about me. I'm just going to keep moving forward. And those are the extremes we have to stay away from. And the people that say give up on your dreams, and then the people that say life is all about dreams, and
Right.
like it's somewhere in between. And
Yeah.
that was why even with my publisher, they said, gosh, head in the clouds, feet on the ground, it's kind of a mouthful. And I said, we need both, though. We
Yeah.
need to
It's
like
so
keep that
appropriate.
dreamer in us alive, but we also have to like take right now really seriously and understand that there's going to be kind of a hard journey ahead of us. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the balance in the book.
Well, you spend quite a bit of time talking about dream killers, and I want to go there in a second. But before that, you've stated a case that we are all dreamers, we are all visionaries, we are all creatives, we all fit somewhere in that category or those categories, and the journey is never easy.
Mhm.
And you actually started this conversation with this is not a destination where you arrive.
Yeah.
this is a journey. You've hit on this a little bit already in our conversation, but I loved how you stressed the importance of kind of getting ready for what you're going to face. And the way you do that is to be really secure in your identity and to be really close to who you call the dream giver.
Yes.
Talk about the importance of the dream giver.
Yeah, and I think that this is where, pursuing our dream leads us to this sort of worshipful stance, which I think is the right response for everything. So, I think when you start to really understand the calling that God has in front of you, you start to really understand that there's a journey that's going to happen in front of you. You have to be able to count the cost, like Jesus said, before you dive into something. So, when you start pursuing something that's maybe a little outrageous that God's given you, you have to know it's going to get really hard. You're going to have all these things coming against you.
Right.
I talk about when my wife went to a class for parenting, and in the class it said the teacher told her expectations kill relationships.
Yeah.
And we have held on to that. My wife told me it yesterday. I had an expectation, it was dash, and she said, "Remember, and it's just something that's reverberated in our marriage because, in terms of parenting, if you expect your 2-year-old to not throw a fit when you go to, a supermarket, and then they throw a fit, you're going to respond with anger, you're going to respond with shock. I can't believe my kid's doing this. But if you have a proper expectation on a 2-year-old, hey, they're probably going to do this one day. What
That's
am I going
right.
to do? And I think it's the same thing when we're starting to step out into callings, we're starting to step out into dreams that God gives us. We cannot have the expectation that it's going to look like the highlights we see on Instagram. So like if you feel like you're called to something like Outcry or something like that, you can't say, "Oh, it's going to look just like Bethel," or, "Oh, it's going to look just like Hillsong." That's a wrong expectation. Your journey is going to be unique to you. It's going to be very, very difficult. You're going to have people who don't understand what you're doing. You're going to have times where you fail and you're going to have to pivot and adjust. You're going to have to lick your wounds a little bit and get back on, get back on the horse and ride, whatever, metaphor you want to use. There are going to be those times where those setbacks happen. And that's why it's so important that we really anchor our identity into what Jesus says about us. And there are things in the Bible that are beautiful, like we're priests, and there's different metaphors that the Bible uses
Right. Right.
to say we're like children of God, and those are all really, really important. But also sitting down and having that relationship with God where you're hearing specifics about yourself is so important too. And understanding the character of the dream giver really
Mm.
helps you approach your dream with the proper expectation.
Yeah.
So if it's outrageous and it seems like, like you're going to need a miracle to get this thing off the ground, the more you spend time with Jesus, the more you realize, oh, that's kind of his MO. That's how he operates normally. It's like step out of the
Yeah.
boat. He didn't tell Peter to like dog paddle to him first. And then, it's step out of the boat occasionally. And so when you spend time with the dream giver, when you understand that God is a God who cares about dreams, that God is a God that gives us things so that we can invest it and see a return, that sort of expectation is foundational. So then when you hit the dream killers, when you hit the things that are kind of come along and try to knock you off your high horse, you already have a proper expectation. You already know what to expect and go,
Yeah.
okay, I'm getting a critic. I knew a critic was going to come my way at some point. Let me filter. Do they have something good to tell me? Is it all just, and that's why in the book, I'm like, you have to have that foundation. Then you can interact with the dream killers with a healthy sort of distance, and a healthy sort of like keeping some of those at arm's length, going, well, I failed, but I'm not a failure.
Yeah.
I have a critic, but that doesn't mean they're right. Those are things that it's like you have to build that foundation before you interact with the dream killers.
Yeah. Well, you have sort of three categories of dream killers. You have the critic, the noise, and the setback. And I found all of this extremely helpful. And I have to say to our viewers here, you are a dreamer. You're a self-professed dreamer. That's the way you put this book together. And yet you are really practical in the second half of the book. And I wanna read a couple of the segments of the book that talk about the critic. You highlight that critics can be internal or external, which I loved, but you encourage people to kind of lean into criticism. And you actually have, I think, a college example of a college professor who was really
Yes.
tough. But here's what
Yes.
you wrote on page 105. Despite poor packaging and careless words, that critic is placed in your path for a reason. And then 2 pages later, you write, the most important reason to seek out critique is to destroy the stronghold of fear in your life and to prepare yourself for even bigger battles to come. And I wrote in the margins, sorry, I did write in your book, and also to get better. And
Yes.
I just love this idea of seeking out criticism. Talk about why that's so powerful.
Yeah, I think when I first started doing Outcry, I knew I was going to have my heroes on this tour, and I was the creative director. So I was going, man, I'm going to be putting together video content and everything else. That's going to be sitting with David Crowder. That's going to be sitting with Hillsong United. You're going, how intimidating is that? And I knew I needed to do the best that I could. So when I was done with my design, with my initial design, I sent it to the head of graphic design at 268. I sent it to the head of design at Hillsong. And then I asked my wife's opinion. I'm like, I want kind of a big, wide variety, people that are in it, people that are not in it. And it was so scary for me to hit send on that email, you know. But I knew I needed to get some critique from people that I respected, to make the best, you know, out of this season, so that it didn't come hit me later when it was already out and it was already too late. I couldn't adjust anything. And I learned that in art school. I mean, art school, you work on this piece of art and you stick it in front of the class and everyone goes, I think it's terrible. And, oh, I
Yeah.
think this is great, you know.
Bang, 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 bang. That's
Oh
right.
yeah. And you have to sort through, okay, that guy seems like he's just trying to get ahead in the class. Man, that person, I really do respect them. I should probably listen to what they have to say.
Right.
And art school does that. But for me, I think some people that really live in this state of fear of, man, if anybody tells me that what I did doesn't, you know, could improve in some way, then my whole world comes crashing down. And that is why we have to be able to have that healthy separation between what we do and who we are.
Yeah.
Again, back to that
That's
foundation.
right.
And you go, hey, I did this thing. I can make another thing, or I can change it. You know, like it's not, if I made this piece of art and people say I don't think it's really working, doesn't mean that I'm not working. You know, it just means that this piece could get better. So yes, these are things that, again, when we change our lens in which we look at it, and we go, no, this critic has been put in my life for a reason. Maybe they're bringing something that I need to pay attention to. Maybe they said it in a terrible way. Maybe they said it in a way that was like, ouch, you know, felt a little too personal. And I've had many, many people do that. But if you could sit down and go, okay, God, that critique it's not a critique on me, it's a critique on my work. How can I get better at my work? Those sort of people, I hate to say, are few and far between. The people that can really go,
Right.
that hurt. And now let me try to filter it and go and get better and get back out there and make something else, you know? And that is something the critic is when it starts shifting into the internal critic is when it's really dangerous. When you start
Right.
really giving into that fear over and over and over, and you're trying to protect all your work, then you don't show anybody anymore. You keep everything inside your computer, you keep everything inside your heart. And you have to not give into fear. You have to conquer that fear, share it with the world around you, know that you're going to get feedback, and just expect to get better.
Yeah. That's so good. Well, as I've mentioned, you get really practical, and it's just a really neat combination of it's good to dream. It's you should pursue your dreams, you should pursue your aspirations, but also there's work to be done. And I love how you talk about you
Yep.
got to prepare, you put in the hours, you've got to connect, you've got to plan, you've got to get feedback, you've got to be a servant. I mean, you got to do the hard stuff. You can't just sit back and expect God to do everything. The one
Yeah.
piece that spoke to me really significantly was in the area of connections. And I think it's maybe because we're a digital company and networking and influencers and digital
Yeah.
connections are so important today. And I love what you wrote in your book. You said, I try to treat every connection as if they matter.
Yeah.
Why is being a good connector and a good networker so important these days?
Yeah. I think, again, it's kind of Christian circles. Sometimes it gets a bad rap, like, oh, you're just networking with people to get something out of them, you know? And yes, if that's your heart, you should probably pause and go, okay, what is my motivation in making this connection?
Yeah.
Um, if it is, I would like to serve them. If it is, I want to foster connections really well because God's given me this relationship on purpose. If that's your heart attitude, then there is a Christian way to network with people without taking advantage of them, you know? And I think that that's the line we really are all, especially in this digital age. Everyone's trying to walk that carefully. So many people throw the baby out with the bathwater though, and they're like, oh, I'm just not even going to get on Instagram. I'm just not even going to give into it. And sure, some people, maybe that's what you need to do. For me, I've always had this attitude of every connection is God breathed. There's God purpose behind it. Maybe it's for this season, maybe it's for the next season. And whenever possible, if somebody's like, hey, Ryan, could you do this thing? Could you post about this thing? My default answer for almost everybody is like, yeah, sure, no
Yeah.
problem.
Right.
Like,
Right.
let's be generous with the influence that God's given us for each other. And I think that it goes back to that John 17 of like, the world's going to know us by the love that we have for each other.
Right.
Christians, we really, if we figure out the art of networking in a beautiful servant way, then we're all helping each other. We're all very generous with our channels, and it just helps everybody. And every now and then there are those moments, and I've had those moments where I'm going, okay, I need to ask a favor. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Right.
Crowder was one of those. One day I was like, I need David, for Outcry, I had for that first book, I had like Jen Johnson wrote a part, Crowder wrote a part, and I called in some favors. I sent some
Yeah.
emails and said,
Yeah.
"Gosh, I know you're so busy, but this would be a huge honor. And part of the vision of this book is to show unity, even with the book. Would you mind doing this?" And guys like Crowder were like, "Sure, no problem." And a few of them, I said, I don't want to, I know you're busy. And they're like, no, we would love to do that, and basically have not because you ask not, for sure.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that
Right.
we just have to learn that the art of that. Occasionally we do call in some of those things, but in a servant way. And I try to get real practical in the book. Hey, if you're going to write an email, don't be
Yeah.
entitled. Don't go, hey, you're a famous person, put this on your channel. Like, don't
Right.
have
Right.
that, and have a servant attitude. And before you ask them for a favor, make sure you've served them in a few ways. These are just some principles and going over and above in practical ways to show people, hey, I'm here. I love you. I want to serve your vision just as much as I would like to have a favor potentially in the future.
Yeah.
And there is a way to walk that out. I try to get real practical with it. I'm like, this is how I do it. There's probably 1,000 different ways to do it. But I even write in there, like, here's an example of an email I would write to
Exactly.
somebody
No,
if I'm
it's
going to
so
ask a
helpful.
favor from them.
Right. It's so
So, like I said, yeah, it's like back solving my own life. I'm going, hey, this
good.
is what I do. You can use it if you want to, but this is kind of the principles, and this is why I do what I do.
Yeah. Well, in the couple minutes that we have left, Ryan, here's the other thing that kind of shook me as I was reading the book, and you sort of start with this and you end with this, and I found it really profound. When you first dreamt up Outcry and what you were going to do with Outcry, the outcome after many years of hard work was a little bit different. You became the
Yeah.
spokesperson for Outcry, not necessarily an artist, leading
Yes.
worship. And then
Yes.
you tell us a story near the end of the book where when you were writing this book, head in the clouds, feet on the ground, you started out, you were like writing a different book,
Yeah.
and you get sort of redirected and bounce a little bit, and you come up with this really great product.
Yeah.
Talk to people about what it means to have changes and ebbs and flows in the journey where the
Yeah.
outcome may not be where you started, but it's just as powerful and it's just as impactful.
Yeah. And I think it's the foundation of how we look at our dreams and passions and the things that we believe are our callings. I use the phrase prophetic echo, but it's just kind of this like God's giving us a little bit of a glimpse of what we're going to do, but it's always frustratingly general. You're going, gosh, I wish there was a little more meat on the bones.
Yeah.
And Outcry, having become a Christian and starting to lead worship, I assumed when I got a dream to start a tour like that, or to do something with a big worship event, that I would be leading worship. But that's not what it turned into. And I think what I had to learn was
Right.
that this new thing that God was leading me into, leading backstage. I mean, I'd be leading backstage with Hillsong United leading worship, and Stephen Furtick would be back there,
Hmm.
or Christine Kane, and I had to be able to lead with confidence in that room. And I'm like, there's no cameras. Occasionally we'd have some cameras in there, but really, this is not an on-stage moment. This is a behind-the-scenes moment.
Right.
But God is calling me to lead back here, and I was going, God, just get me, an in-ear monitor with a click track and a guitar. I'm comfortable with that.
Right.
Don't get me out there with these people that are my heroes and tell me to lead. Like, who am I to do that? And that was that huge lesson I learned the first Outcry tour. In those backstage moments, I really felt like the Lord said, Ryan, you need to walk back here and be confident,
Mm.
not because of your abilities, but because of your calling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's so many of us that are in that moment of going, oh, I'm so uncomfortable right now, but I'm just going to step out and I'm going to just try it, and I'm going to fail, and I'm going to take some notes, and I might beat myself up a little bit tonight about it, but tomorrow I'm going to wake up and try it again. And that was that beautiful, like, again, that expectation of that your calling's not a destination, it's a journey. God may give you this initial dream, but as you start moving, uh, he's going to go, hey, well, how about you do this, and how about you try that? And now that you're at this point, I'm bringing something new to you.
Right.
Um, if I had said no to those, I wouldn't have written any books. I never thought I'd be an author. That was like the last thing I thought I would do. And then I started writing books, and I was going, I actually really like this.
Yeah.
Like, thank you, God, that you brought this to me. And I've always had that kind of open hands posture of, the Bible says that the word is a lamp unto our feet.
Mm.
You don't see very far with a lamp. It's like you got your first couple steps, and that's about it.
That's it.
And that's what, for me, I'm going, you've got to be able to say, okay, I've got this big dream. What's my first step into it? What's the thing that's clear right now? And I have to be able to pivot. And this book was a great example of it. It's so funny. I'm like, man, I have to write about it at the end of this book, because I started writing a book about creativity in the church, going, yes, this is going to be it. And one day on vacation, I'm reading the book of Joseph, and I'm going, man, this is a guy who had a dream from God. His life went into the proverbial toilet,
That's
and
right.
he's like, a slave. But at every stage, he treated every stage with purpose. He worked hard. He's in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar is going, I see that everything you do prospers and that the Lord is with you. He is working hard in a season where it's not upward mobility. It's not like, man, I'm going to be second to Pharaoh if I play my cards right
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
There was none of that strategy. He just took today really, really seriously. And
Mm.
God crashed into my plans. I was already working with Zondervan, already working with a team that was like intimidating to me. And I had to come back to him and go, okay, guys, I think the Lord's telling me something different, and just please don't think I'm a flake. Please don't think that I'm going to do this again, but I'm really feeling strong about this. And then I got to something that I woke up every day excited to write. I was like, oh man, thank you, Lord, for giving me that clarity.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, God can't direct our path if we're not walking. So we have to start walking. We have to start taking the steps in front of us, and keep our ear to the dream giver and go, okay, God, what are you saying about this season? And he might go, now I want you to turn right. And you go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But we would have never heard it had you not been walking, had you not been moving forward in what God was speaking to you.
Well, that's really, really well said. Well, Ryan, we're talking about head in the clouds, feet on the ground. As I mentioned to you, there were a number of things that we've talked about that just were really impactful for me personally, and I thought really insightful. What did we miss? What do you want people to experience when they read Head in the Clouds, Feet on the Ground?
I think the thing for me, I mean, I think we hit all the high points, but I would summarize it by saying God has created you uniquely. God has given you a story that you're going to look back and go, wow, how amazing. And if you start to take yourself seriously, you start to really take seriously the giftings, callings, passions, dreams that you feel like God's given you, your life will really change. It really will. It won't look like the way that you think it's going to look, but it won't stay the same either.
Yeah.
And I think that especially in this season, I'm really feeling like I woke up in January 2020 feeling this urgency, like God's saying, invest what I've given you.
Mm,
Invest right now. Like there's this kingdom urgency that I woke up with in January. And now all of a sudden COVID-19 and all this stuff is going on.
right.
God has not forgotten about you. He's not forgotten about the dreams he's given you.
Mm,
He has not forgotten about his kingdom and expanding his kingdom. And so I think we're about to enter a really exciting season. So for the people out there that are following Jesus, they start to take themselves seriously. They start to really dig down and build a strong foundation. God is going to do far more than you can ask or imagine in this next season. And I really believe by faith that we're going to start seeing an explosion in the church
mm,
unlike we've ever seen before. And not because there's a handful of famous pastors exploding the church, but because we take ourselves seriously, we take the sphere of influence that's in front of us seriously, and we start to see a return on what God invested in us.
yeah. I love it. Well, Ryan, thank you for writing Head in the Clouds, Feet on the Ground, and thank you for sharing some insights with us today. Before we go, where can people get their hands on the book? How can they find out more about you, more about Outcry? Where can they connect with you?
So Zondervan set up a website, readheadintheclouds.com. So it kind of gives you all the outlets. If you're like most people, just search Ryan Romeo or Head in the Clouds on Amazon. It's on there. It's on Kindle. It's on
Perfect.
Audible and everything else. And then for me, social media, I am really Instagram. I'm an Instagram guy. I have
Yeah.
Twitter. I have Facebook. I have like 12 people on TikTok because somebody said I should get on there. And I went on there like twice and was like, I don't know. Instagram is my thing. So at Ryan Romeo, that's the main place where I post all my content.
Outstanding. Well, Ryan Romeo, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been a blast to talk about Head in the Clouds, Feet on the Ground, a survival guide for creatives, visionaries, and dreamers. We'll continue to pray for you and your family and your mission and this book and all the influence that you're having. It's really been a ton of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David, for having me. It's been awesome.